we create capacity. And as HR people, we need to be innovative to create that capacity. We know that certain areas in Africa are very deprived, and we accept that. But if we can start taking small steps, and particularly in South Africa, they've done it in the Eastern Cape. I know that NNMU, when they were in NNMU, now the NNMU have had a project in the form of Transkei around bringing digitization to the villages. We need, as HR people, to be looking for opportunities to invest in social upliftment. We are the representatives of the people as HR practitioners, and we need to go beyond our organizations. But even within our organizations, we need to create a platform for every single employee to have access to the digital world. And if we do that, we are then creating the opportunity for upliftment. And we will then take our organization to the next level.
Okay, just firing up another one quickly while I'm checking the poll in the back here as well. Question in from Lucia. We need HR analytics qualifications. Let it not be part of a model, waiting to do my master's in it. I need information management to add to my HR. I thought I'd just read that. It's not as part of a question, but more of a statement. But something to be added, I think.
Yeah, I think HR departments right now are spending quite a lot of time trying to look at those future fit skills. You know, we talk about it. It's interesting. We're being asked by a number of our clients, what skills do I need as HR to be future fit, as a future fit function? And data analytics is definitely one of that. But the analytics part of it is almost last year. The new skills that HR design needs and requires to make any useful, meaningful use of that data is to develop data scientist capability and the ability to take that and turn it into something proactive that we can do. Now, the other one which stood out as quite interesting is digital marketing. And your internal customer, the individuals you serve in your business, are more interested in things going on outside them and being marketed to them digitally via various interfaces, LinkedIn, etc., etc. But internally, we haven't developed our digital marketing ability within HR, as an example, as a skill set that realizes the need to try and uncover those jobs, those future fit jobs, are ever present and everywhere for you. You don't have to go do a deep one-year project to try and define those. They are existing already, and they exist online. You can go onto various platforms and go and find that. MIT Sloan have done some great work on it. They've written white papers on it. They've defined what the next 3 to 5 years of the new skill sets are. And so I think as practitioners, again, to be able to do this to other people versus consume some of it ourselves and say, what do I need to develop in HR to actually compete and to be relevant, is where I think we're getting stuck. To the further question that you mentioned earlier in your answer about e-infrastructure, it would be also of note and importance to note that 10 of the 10 most internet and e-based throughput countries in the world, Africa ranks very highly, and of the 10, top 3 is in Southern Africa and the SADC regions. And so sometimes I think we think it's a barrier, but in actual fact it's live and it's present, and there's no one here that's not walking around with 1 or maybe 2 cell phones. And so too, this environment has changed.
I've got another question here which I feel is quite interesting. To my left here, Charmaine's saying something here. It's a very relevant topic. However, I am yet to find an HR solution for people that truly allows HR to become fully digitized. Well, now I think each of you can contribute to that question.
I think that's a very interesting question. And I would bounce it back at you. What are you guys as HR practitioners doing to become fully utilized? What other things can we do that enhances the employee experience? And we're not talking about hours in the classroom. We're not talking about expensive interventions. We're not talking about taking people out of the workplace. An immediate solution that we can have is to give people, either through their phones or through computers, access to learning opportunities where they can learn at home and they can develop themselves. And as HR practitioners, we can go to the World Economic Forum website and we can identify certain jobs that, let's call it future jobs, and we can offer our workforce the opportunity, and it doesn't have to be obligatory. We can offer them the opportunity to put their hand up and say, hey, I want to do this course. And they can do it online in their own time and for a very small investment, and build up that portfolio of learning that ultimately, once we have moved ahead, we are going to look back and say, wow, you can aggregate learning, and I know it sounds radical to you, but you could actually get a qualification from a university through aggregating a number of short courses that result in a qualification.
Thanks. Perhaps also, if I can just make sure what I'm hearing, the question that was posed was, how do we find the digital solution for our employees? Is that correct? Okay. So I think again, one of my answers would be is, what do you see as being a digital environment? What sort of engagements do you want? Do you simply want a digital record of whether it's training records or attendance records, which according to Mark Wilson, we shouldn't be worrying about whether or not people are coming to work on time, but rather on the outputs. I know that elicited some interest, but we've got to be clear on what type of experience are we looking to do. Are we, again, a system of record versus a system of engagement, where the individual has freedom of access to world-class learning assets that Tim is alluding to, that allows a freedom of access to build up the skills that he or she may be looking at developing. And they may not necessarily be in that person's line of work where they are today, because they may be upskilling and reskilling themselves for a future job. So it all depends on the range that you're looking to digitize and what that experience needs to look like. Whether you need to manage performance online, whether you need to simply manage access to learning, it all very much depends on what is it that you see as a digitized workforce. I don't know if you've got something to add on that.
Absolutely. So I've been spending the last 18 months researching globally all of what I call the struggles for progress that we have in HR, to go and find ways to cost effectively digitize HR's journey. Because we think we need to buy these mammoth systems and hundreds of millions of rands to solve our challenges in HR, when we know today that there's an app for everything we find a challenge within life. There happens to be a cost-effective app or solution for most of our challenges. I'll use a quick example because I think it's relevant to the question of digitization. If you were asked the question today by your business to please define your culture code, just a show of hands, how many people would be able to write down on paper what their culture code is in their organization? So just to write it down. Write down your culture code. I see a lot of heads going, no, not possible, right? And I asked the question, that's always been a topic of conversation or question mark in our world, is actually what's our culture? And the definition of culture is the way we do things here, whatever your organization is. There's an app out right now at kind of $2 an individual, where you can hack your culture immediately by having a bot through AI interface interview every person in your organization at their desktops or on their cell phones and ask a question around culture related to your business. And before you know it, you know that word cloud you saw earlier on as an example? That will be able to give you a clean synthesis of what your culture actually means to the people in your organization in a very cost-effective way. Now, we've had the problem of culture code definition and culture codification for probably as long as I can remember, 20, 30 years. but there is a solution to digitize. The question to you, to what Tim said earlier on, is what work have you done to go and find the answers to these struggles, because they actually do exist. You're not alone, and everyone else is struggling like you are with the same challenges. So throughout the human capital value chain, before onboarding, before even talent, technologies, the talent development journey, technologies exist today that are small, micro solutions to solving some really big struggles, cost effectively. So just I thought I'll venture there.
I'd like to just extend, we've got a little bit more time, so because the other breaker was still going on. I feel that these two are quite important questions to the topic. So this one's from, just see, it's from Thomas, I think. Yeah, it's Thomas. Are HR practitioners not threatened by digital evolution to such an extent that they will not embrace it and rather stick to the old ways of doing things?
I would like to answer that, and I will stand up to answer that, because it's been a pet hobby horse of mine. HR needs to claim their seat. Okay? Every one of us here, we are not threatened, because we can't run our organizations without people. But perhaps the days of this massive HR department with hundreds of clerks wading through timesheets every Friday is gone. And it's an opportunity for each and every one of us. And some of us don't have that much time, Jerry? But other of us looking around here have a lot of time. And we must use that time effectively to ensure that HR earns that seat at the table. HR is a strategic function. HR is not a mechanical function. And we need to stand up. And let's stand up. Who wants to stand up here? Please stand up. To not be a typical HR person. Let's be a strategic partner. And I know in Title we've tried to do that, and a number of organizations have succeeded. But let's pledge today to be that strategic partner. And let's go out and let's seek out innovative means to get to the table. Because it's been a debate since I was in my 20s. How does HR get to the table? And that's a question that I would love to leave you with.
Sure, tough one to follow. I think there's an underlying answer in that question, and that's the word relevance. I think with the pace at which the world of work is changing, I think the reality is, with humble respect to the person who asked the question, if you don't change, your relevance is going to diminish significantly. However, there's an opportunity, and there's an opportunity to look at this challenge, this opportunity that we have to transform, and look at it, how we're going to show up, and to try out things, to go and look at, as Irv was suggesting, to go and find those applications out there, take them back into business and say, let's shoot some bullets at going digital in our environments. Not all the environments are as conducive to digital transformation as we may think, and so we may need to, as we often say in our business, shoot bullets before we shoot cannonballs. So you don't have to go out and buy a massive ERP system and implement a full learner management system or talent management system. Maybe we just need to go small, and maybe we start with something that we know that the system and the business can tolerate. And we're going to shoot some bullets at this and show that it actually works, and gather some empirical data. If, for example, it is about your culture code and to what extent people are really engaged and seeking to make a difference in the world that they're working in. We don't need to go out and change the world at a swipe of a pen.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try and say more than what Ms. Jets have said. It's just a self-belief issue. And I think there's a few slides, if you don't mind me sharing now, on potentially how we get there, because I think that the skills that we desire, there was a beautiful comment by a guy called Jim Quick the other day online saying, the soft stuff, the soft skills that we all stayed away from, we're all teaching this technical stuff, the soft stuff are the hardest things today. That the soft is hard. And I think there's some real important opportunities for us. And I want to share a journey before we get into other questions. If we could just roll forward those slides to the mindset idea, the fearless environments we create. And do you mind, Gavin, if I skip? No, go. So just keep on going, because I think I want to go back one. Just go back one. There we go. This is an interesting thing, and I think it's important that why you're feeling like that, the sense from where that question came from around relevance is the technology is moving at such a rapid rate, and we as organizations are moving slow, and that gap's getting wider there, if you can see that. The opportunity isn't to try and run faster or try and become more relevant, in the race, because you're going to lose. I mean, the gap is moving. I got 6 months ago, I got an iPhone 10X, I think it is, right? And it was 6 months ago, and now I feel irrelevant because they loaded now. The 11 was launched. I'm thinking to myself, now I'm another year and a half behind. What's going down? And all of a sudden I now need 3 cameras on my phone, not just 1 camera. I'm thinking, what's that about? So the speed is not going to happen. I think on the right-hand side it says the change of this widens, and we're really running at pace. It's our job as HR to reset where we might find ourselves and leapfrog to the position of where the organization finds itself and the opportunity to move into that digital space. So just moving forward 2 slides, please. This gentleman, Dave White, is someone, if you haven't followed, please write it down and go and look at some of his reading. He talks about this idea of the soft skill we need to develop, certainly in business as leaders, to have fearless conversations or courageous conversations. He says, the courageous conversations are the conversations you are not having now. More importantly, it's the one you don't want to have and the one you hope is not true. And so in these organizations, slide forward please, we're finding that, there's a gentleman that wrote a book called Principles, Ray Dalio. And I'm just going to ask you to go back to that video. He's the chairman and CEO of an organization called Bridgewater. They're the most successful hedge fund business in the world. And they've been practicing the idea of principles. And there's a book that is written called Principles as well. And I just want you to listen, tune into this idea of how do you uncover the truth of how you feel as HR, the truth of how you show up, so that we can make progress to move forward in a belief system that we buy into as HR. Now I want you just to listen to the video and then we'll get to this model that exists.
Whether you like it or not, radical transparency and algorithmic decision making is coming at you fast and is going to change your life. That's because it's now easy to take algorithms and embed them into computers and gather all that data that you're leaving on yourself all over the place and know what you're like, and then direct the computers to interact with you in ways that are better than most people can. While that might sound scary, I've been doing this for a long time and I have found it to be.
I think let's pause that. It's interesting that you can listen to a voiceover and not see visuals, and it isn't as powerful, right, Jay? It's an interesting thing, but we don't listen to radio that much anymore, so I wanna pause on the whole video thing, if you don't mind. And go 1 slide forward. So basically in this Ray Dalio, he introduces the concept called radical truthfulness. The opportunity for us to, at whatever level or structure we might find ourselves, to offer feedback. And you heard Mark talk about it earlier on, these guys want to really make a difference and make an impact. And the idea is that the barriers that we face are about our own egos and our own blind spots. As HR, and I contend as HR, we have these blind spots, we make these assumptions about the people. We design and we go and design these beautiful hamburgers with all the beautiful trimmings. And what we forget is that our customers are vegetarian. They're not consuming those hamburgers anymore as they used to. And so part of this idea is that we have our own blind spots as HR, and we show up and maybe make ourselves less relevant as we do this. Just go slide. So I think just 1 slide forward. What we've looked at is saying, how do you establish an environment where courageous conversations could exist, where you develop the skill as HR? Because going to ask for money or going to try to change mindsets or adopt digital, all these things need real radical truthfulness in ourselves and how we might journey through this environment and practice it and go through that. Slide. So what we found is that there's 4 keys to unlocking this courageous conversation. I want to share that with you now, and we don't mind sharing some of these slides with the audience if they require. There's a practice tool on how to do this. So the first one we talk about intimacy, which is really closing the gap, the personal, the gap in the institutional as well as the attitudinal distance between ourselves and the people who we serve. And how do we become more intimate in those engagements so that the conversations we are having are one in trusted spaces and not ones that are by distance or via memo or via email or via some form of communication that doesn't create intimacy. The interesting part about this intimacy thing is, and you'll know this from your relationships, is the person that you are now married to, or is your spouse or your partner, is the person in your journey who probably was the most truthful, who showed up the most authentic, and we connected with that. And in that same way as HR, how do we close the gap in creating an emotional proximity connection before the conversation happens? So as an example, the executive, the CFO, whoever it is, the HR executive, whoever you're trying to sell the idea to, how connected are you outside of the conversation about HR? So how many conversations have you had with the individual who you're trying to position or sell to and to build trust and connection? And I'd venture very little. I'd venture that you're showing up for conversations where it's about the business and the transactions and the spreadsheets and the skills programs and things you're doing. So intimacy, an important key to unlocking that. Interactivity. How do I then create dialogue, not monologue? How do I then ask questions in this truthfulness environment that challenges the mindsets and the blind spots of the organization? How do I find truth? And how do I ask the difficult questions I have in my head, the questions I'm not asking myself, or that's in my heart? How do I ask those questions, again, so I can be honest with myself, and then engage an audience in that way? Inclusion is about this idea that there's substance in the conversation, and I can share that ownership. I'll use a quick example. We were asked by an organization, a client, to design a coaching program because they desire a coaching culture. I mean, how many of you are running coaching programs or trying to develop a coaching culture in your organization? Any of you? Yeah? The interesting part about it was they had done it about 4 times before and it had failed. And they couldn't figure out the why. And they were designing coaching from a perspective of theory and practice, but what they had done this time around, differently, for the idea of inclusion, is ask the individuals who wish to be coached to design for themselves the experience they would like to go through, and then to create that as a designed activity and then bring coaches into that world. So how do they want to show up? How would they like to be treated? What kind of questions? What progress do they want to make as individuals? And have the environment shift to one of an inclusive discussion in that courageous environment. So not have HR own it, but have the teams, the business, and the individuals involved. And finally, intentionality as a key component part of this courageous discussion. What we've also discovered is these conversations, you close them off meaningfully. And it's, again, of interest for me when we have meetings. We've got 10 or 12 meetings in our diaries. When we finish, we say thank you, can't wait for our next meeting, and we leave. And we leave with no intention to improve, no intention to make progress. We don't hold each other accountable for that conversion. And so the next meeting we have is about the actions we agreed the first time, but we've done nothing with that. So intentionality is when I'm going to be courageous, when I'm going to be intimate, when I'm going to interact, when I'm going to share ownership, I'm also going to show intentionality that I want to change. Again, to this courageous discussion, an important journey for us to go through to unlock how we might find ourselves being positioned as HR in business today. We've practiced this, not just with ourselves, but we've practiced this with a number of large organizations. And when HR shows up with these opportunities to unlock and engage, they're not only earning the right to be at the table, they're earning the emotional process that the organization has to go through with the leadership team and the leadership engagements. So I thought I want to share that.
I think I'm going to just close off by this one question I think we can all field. Because you are admin on this, there are more other questions which I'll pass on, which will come in here, which you guys can share and then answer, because there's a reply format in Slido where you can actually speak to the people that's asked you questions which we could not field on the panel right now. So I think I just want to go to this one quickly. How do we manage digitalization and work balance life? When can employees have their me time? When we push training on their phones?
Okay, so let me have a first look at that. The work-life balance is a very real thing, and it is what we're not suggesting is that we simply make these things available and encroach on people's personal lives and so forth. But it is about choice, and I think at an accessibility level is when it is available to somebody. There's the choice of being able to do that. But ultimately, work-life balance, in my view, is a personal choice, and it's there for them to do that.
If you breach the workplace rule, there's no intention or negligence, there is no ill health or injury, by default it must be poor performance. Lots of confusion that created within this existed because until not so long ago, 2016, the courts, the CCMA, bargaining councils, etc., did not make this right distinction between statutory obligations, statutory fairness, and contractual obligations and contractual fairness. It's very different. So, for instance, one of the speakers are going to talk about the ZOL. And when we talk about the ZOL and the smoking of the ZOL, if you have got a policy internally at your employer that deals with this intoxicating substance, and you breach that policy practice procedure, then the dismissal will be branded as unlawful. If you don't have a policy practice procedure that deals with it, and you purely utilize your statutory test, then the dismissal will be branded as unfair. Lots of practitioners battle with these concepts, but that's how it's been developed over the last 2-3 years. Not only in South Africa, but worldwide. Now, I call this misconduct incapacity simpliciter because it's a simple application of your statutory duties. It's the introduction to the main topic, and that's derivative misconduct. Derivative misconduct does not feature in misconduct incapacity simpliciter. It features below the line in what we call misconduct incapacity non-simpliciter. If I can get the next slide, please. Next slide. All right. So just go one slide back. So there it is, then it's non-simpliciter. That's where derivative misconduct fits in. Move on, one slide please. Okay. So derivative misconduct falls within the DNA and family of common purpose, team misconduct, operation requirements, bona fide and rational suspicion. It's something different from the pure simple application of Schedule 8 to the Labour Relations Act. And if you look at the slides, and you'll get copies of them, you'll see how the development of derivative misconduct took place, and I'll explain the concept now. And finally, the Constitutional Court had something to say about it. Now, I've been listening to the previous speakers that have talked about a fearless manager within this HR environment, and there are two comments that I would like to add to this. The first one is, HR operates within constitutional imperatives. We've got a constitution where second generation rights are included in our constitution, like for instance the right to fair labour practices. We seem to forget that. We seem to think to ourselves that we have benchmarking internally, externally, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is you are subject in the HR environment, unlike other professions, to constitutional imperatives. That's why what the Constitutional Court tells you pertaining to suspensions are important. That's why what the Constitutional Court tells you pertaining to derivative misconduct is important. So first of all, a fearless practitioner is a practitioner that adheres to those constitutional values and is continually interpreted by the Constitutional Court. And that's important. The second thing to remember, and that's just my adding to this, is what is a fearless practitioner? If you take it within this environment, the employer relations labor law environment, if you're out of date, you're an incompetent practitioner. If you're an incompetent practitioner, you're a fearful practitioner. If you're a fearful practitioner, you behave absolutely differently from the way you should behave. Filled with knowledge, confidence, so you can move on. And so one of the items that you'll have to understand is this change pertaining to derivative misconduct. All right, so we can move on. Next slide. Okay, so through the slides, we've tracked for you what derivative misconduct means. And just remember the background, it falls outside of the simpliciter, in other words, the simple statutory test. It falls within non-simpliciter. What does it mean? It means it's not a simple application of your statutory recipe. It's in that family of common cause. It's in that family of team misconduct. Okay. So, before the Constitutional Court, how did you and I see derivative misconduct? I'm an employee, Saki is my employer. Saki comes to me and says to me, Brian, I know that you know that the following misconduct is taking place. Therefore, as an employee, you must tell me. You must tell me who's committing the primary misconduct. And if you're not telling me who's committing the primary misconduct, then Brian, you are also individually and independently of the primary misconduct. And what is that? You're derivatively guilty. On what basis? Quite simply because you are breaching the trust that I've put in you as an employee. You are breaching the good faith that we have towards each other. That's how you and I saw derivative misconduct. So something separately from the primary misconduct. All right, so Judge Vroneman, in a unanimous decision, overturned the case law in this regard. And I'm first going to just tell you how you and I thought as practitioners before this. Just go back one slide. So there's the Chalkhead judgment, already back from 1998, Labour Appeal Court judgment. And if you can move on to the next slide. There's the clarification in the Schlabela judgment, again another Labour Appeal Court judgment, which basically says the following. My mere knowledge of who's committing the primary misconduct, if I don't tell my employer, is good enough to find me guilty of derivative misconduct. And it's based on that thing right on top you see the duty of good faith towards the employer. And that's the basis upon which the Labour Appeal Court up to now has judged derivative misconduct. Now look at that date, 2015. We've moved to the next slide. It was subsequently interpreted, and literally the answer, look at the next slide, the answer is therefore that, that if I have the knowledge of what happens in the primary misconduct, I don't tell my employer, there's no justification for that, and I'm guilty then of derivative misconduct. When you see the slides, you'll see crosses on the corners. That's everywhere where the Constitutional Court has emphatically changed this approach. So let's get to the summary of what we are now. Next slide. Next slide. All right. So, Constitutional Court in Dunlop Mixing said the following. There cannot be a duty to disclose based on a unilateral duty of good faith. And the Constitutional Court went and analysed the employment relationships between an employer and an employee and said there are two types of relationships. The first is what we call a fiduciary relationship. And that's a limited environment. That's where, for instance, an employee is appointed as an agent of the employer, or the employee, for instance, is appointed to represent the employer. Then the two fundamental fiduciary duties. One, you can't make a secret profit, and two, you can't act contrary to the employer. That is only in a limited number of cases. All other employees are only subject to what we call a unilateral duty of good faith. And under those circumstances, there is no legal duty of an employee to spill the beans against another co-employee and tell the employer that he or she has been involved in misconduct. So the Constitutional Court, Befroneman J, said the following: we've wrongly interpreted all of this. That what we in fact have done, this duty that we've placed an employee, is akin to the fiduciary duty. And that has been the wrong legal approach, which, by the way, I think is correct. So the judge says then, how do you get an employee to tell you as Mr. Employer what's going on? Because we know at the workplace there's misconduct going on, there's pilferage going on, there's theft going on, etc., etc. How do you get an employee to do that? If you look at the screen, it must be based on a reciprocal contractual duty. So you move from the unilateral duty to reciprocal duty. And so before you as an employer can expect an employee to tell you what is going on, where your business is hurting, you must provide a guarantee for safety. You must say, if you tell me, I'll guarantee your safety. And the second one is, you must provide protection before and after the disclosure. If you don't do those two minimum things, you can't expect an employee to tell you who's stealing your bananas. You can't expect an employee, as part of the duty of good faith, to tell you where there's pilferage. And you can't expect an employee to tell you where you, the employer, is bleeding. So that's the first big change that's happened. So before this Constitutional Court judgment, employers was the view that there was a unilateral duty on an employee to tell the employer anything that's not in the employer's interest. Not so. It has to be reciprocal, and you have to give at least those two undertakings. But the most important change here happened in the third factor, if you look at the screen. And that is, there is no longer misconduct called derivative misconduct. It no longer stands independently of the primary misconduct. The only way an employee could be guilty for not disclosure would be, for instance, becoming what we call an accessory after the fact. So you, the employer, have to prove the following. The employee had knowledge of the misconduct. You've given the employee the opportunity to spill the beans. You've given the opportunity, the guarantee of safety. You've given the employee the undertakings that you will protect the employee. And despite that, the employee did not do it. Why not? You then, as the employer, have to prove that the employer associated himself, that employee associated himself with the primary misconduct. And that's a hell of a difficult thing to prove. So, if my name is Goodyear Tires, and I know there's a syndicate stealing tires, and I know that an employee knew about it and knows who's involved, I have to prove that that employee associated himself or herself with that theft. Right. Now that association can happen either by direct evidence, or alternatively can happen by means of an inference being drawn. So this is how it's changed. As a fearless practitioner, you'll have to understand how this dynamics work. Fearful practitioners will simply just drop it and say it's too difficult to, in fact, pull off. Fearless practitioners will say, let me find out what the rules are, and let's see whether we still can't get this moral duty encompassed in a legal obligation. So that's the first part of my topic that I'm talking about. If we can move to the next slide. The second one is to deal with unfair labor practices. Now, again, if you look at practitioners, that what their perception is of what is fair or not is borne out about how you were trained as an HR practitioner. It's all changed. It's all changed because we've got statutory recipes, and unless the statutory recipe says you must do something, it's not there. It's like for the first time when the new Labour Relations Act was promulgated, it says by analogy, these are the only ingredients you can mix together to make a fair labour practice. Anything outside of that is non-statutory things that you have mixed and matched yourself by means of policies, practice, procedures, etc., and they become contractual obligations. I mean, I at lunchtime walked out there and I see there's currently training going on how to initiate a disciplinary inquiry. And I want to put a note on there and say, please go and read Schedule 8. There are no disciplinary inquiries. So unless you've got a contractual obligation like that, there are no such inquiries. Right, next slide. So here's an example of how the law's changed. So the majority of suspensions take place in a company because you and I have got policies, practice, procedures that govern it. The majority of suspensions take place, we've got forms you fill in. The majority of suspensions take place because that's how we did in the past, and we add then what we call good benchmarking practices to it. However, that is a contractual environment. Because suspensions operate with LRA within a statutory environment. These are two different causes of action. If you suspend unfairly, you do so in terms of the Labour Relations Act. If you suspend unlawfully, you do so because you haven't followed a policy and practice procedure, which was a contractual term. If you have employment contracts and the second last paragraph reads something like this: included in your terms and conditions are all policy, practice, procedures and any amendment thereto. Understand you've created contractual rights and obligations enforceable outside of the Labour Relations Act. Okay, it's another nightmare that practitioners have to deal with. All right, so if you look at the screen, now we're talking about fairness, your pre-dismissal suspensions, in other words, not your suspensions and sanctions, Labour Appeal Court judgments. After the employer makes the decision, you refer the matter statutory in terms of section 186(2)A of the Labour Relations Act, and generally you then go to the PCCMA, the Bargaining Council. Conciliation, arbitration. Only in exceptional circumstances would you go to the Labour Court. Next slide. And here's the big change. So this is the long judgment, it's the Brewery's judgment. Now you and I grew up in an environment where we thought to ourselves, before you suspend somebody, you need to give this person the right to be heard. Why? Because we equated this, what we thought is fairness in the workplace. Remember, that's out of sync with the Constitution, it's out of sync with the Labour Relations Act. And because these are statutory rights, it's not surprising, therefore, that the Constitutional Court says, go and read the Labour Relations Act. There is no procedural fairness before you suspend. So you and I grew up in an environment, if you look at the screen, that before you suspend, the other side was heard. Before you suspended, you gave the other party a reasonable time to respond. Before you suspend, the person could even ask for further particulars. And before you suspend, the employee was entitled to know the information upon which you suspend a person. That's all been eliminated by the Constitutional Court. Why? Because we deal with statutory recipes. If for whatever reason you're a practitioner that's created policies, practice, procedures where you've entrenched those rights, they are not statutory rights, they are contractual rights. So if you, despite this judgment, do not comply with your policies, practice, procedures pertaining to suspensions, those suspensions will be branded as unlawful. So close your eyes and dream your dreams. You've got no statutory rights and obligations. You purely have to comply with the statutory obligations. No contractual ones, statutory obligations. Under that environment, you simply have to apply the substantive fairness requirements, no procedural fairness requirements, and the dismissal is branded as fair. Okay? Different cause of action if indeed what you've done have still got policies, practice, procedures. Now, it's one of the big fights that practitioners currently battle with. Remember, this trend sort of started in 2016. People think that if they comply with their policies, practice, procedures, that makes the consequence fair. It doesn't. All it does, it gives you lawfulness. Fairness became a statutory measurement. That's the recipe you have to deal with. So in other words, a commissioner, a labour court, labour appeal court, can't take into account your compliance as an employer with contractual rights and obligations to determine something is statutory fair. It's a big change. I do these lectures around the country, and you can see practitioners battle with this. Because we come from an environment where we had all of these things chucked together. Now it's being separated. All right, so if you look at the screen, so it's only substantive fairness that's applicable to suspensions prior to dismissal. You can only suspend pending serious misconduct. You can only suspend pending an investigation into that serious misconduct. And there has to be certain substantive considerations. They have been confirmed by the Constitutional Court. Will you jeopardize my potential investigations? Will you interfere with my evidence? Will you interfere with my potential witnesses? Will you interfere with my assets or property? Or alternatively, lastly, will you endanger the safety of anybody involved with the organization? Procedural fairness is out. So you ask me what a fearless practitioner is? A fearless practitioner takes into account a constitutional court judgment like this, figure out that it's in fact counterproductive. You've heard this word a lot of times, not adding value if you maintain two different systems in your workplace. A statutory one and a contractual one. Because what you in fact lead your employer out and where you're hanging him out to is quite simply he's then subject to two different causes of action. And as the law is developed up to now, the employee can sue you in both or the alternative. So you can say, I challenge my dismissal as unfair, and I also challenge my dismissal as unlawful. I challenge my suspension as unfair, and I also challenge it as unlawful. Remember, pertaining to unlawfulness, there's no 12 months cap for compensation. There's no 24 months cap for compensation. It's patrimonial losses and non-patrimonial losses. Your dignity, etc., etc. Next slide. So I've dealt now with before the employer makes the decision to dismiss, to suspend. After it made the decision to suspend, only under exceptional circumstances could you then go to the labour court. One of the grounds before the long judgment that you could go to the labour court is indeed if you did not comply with procedural fairness. We now know that procedural fairness is not part of the statutory recipe. If you've been stupid enough to keep it part of your contractual recipe, you've laid yourself open to a contractual claim in terms of section 77.3 of the BCA. Right, so under these circumstances, financial prejudice becomes important, psychological prejudice becomes important, social and personal standing of the employee becomes important, and the integrity and dignity of the employee are considerations that the Labour Court will take into account. So I summarize for you. If you look at derivative misconduct, the Constitutional Court indicated how you apply with a statutory recipe. You can still go and create a contractual obligation on an employee and say, if you know about misconduct and you do not tell me about it, and you have got no justification to tell me, then you are guilty derivatively. You could do it contractually. The same way pertaining to suspensions, you could still go and create procedural fairness. But all you do is, you do not add value in the workplace and you complicate the scenarios. So, after 1994, we as a nation decided to codify labour law. Before 1994, labour law wasn't codified in South Africa. We had a definition of an unfair labour practice that basically read, it's any labour practice that unfairly affects the relationship between employer and employee. And content was given to that definition by the old industrial court. The moment you woke up on the 11th of November 1996, your law became codified. So therefore you should have realized as practitioners that there's a difference between statutory obligations and contractual obligations. And that's all the CCMA and the Labour Court, Labour Appeal Court can do. They can judge you for the Labour Relations Act compliance or not. And this is an example of how this worked. And the last issue I want to talk about is legal representation. So that's come back to bite us. We thought that legal representation has been sorted out. It hasn't, and I'm absolutely certain that this is going to end up again in the Constitutional Court. So if you look at the board, there's Rule 25(1)(c) of the CCMA rules. If the disputes are about misconduct, incapacity for work performance, incapacity, hill of injury, compliance orders, written undertakings, monies owing, and the National Minimum Wage Act, then legal representation is only permitted if the commissioner and both parties so agree, or alternatively the parties can't so agree, the commissioner exercises his or her discretion to grant legal representation. That was Rule 25(1)(c). Next slide. So when the commissioner exercised his or her discretion to allow legal representation, you look at various factors, the nature of the questions of law, complexity of the dispute, public interest, and the competitive ability of the parties or the representatives. So that's what we thought the law was. 1 November 2018 kicks in the Legal Practice Act. So I'm an advocate in terms of the Legal Practice Act. I belong to a bar society, and this is what Section 25(2) now says. I'm going to read it to you. A legal practitioner, whether practicing as an advocate or attorney, has the right to appear on behalf of any person in any court in the Republic or before any board, tribunal or similar institution subject to subsection 3 and 4, not applicable here, or any other law. And then there's section 25(3), and that says basically candidate attorneys have the same rights. So we read that as lawyers, and we say, well, the new act applicable to us, operating from 1 November 2018, means quite simply that I can go in terms of that act to the CCMA arbitration and conciliation, and I can represent the client. Okay. So how was this interpreted? A couple of years before this act came into operation, there was the Harrogate Projects Award. That's a CCMA award. It was handed down before the Legal Practice Act came into operation, and in that the Commission already made the following comment. An Act of Parliament, because remember the Legal Professions Act is an Act of Parliament, trumps, enjoys preference over CCMA rules. So the Commission in that case already said, when this thing comes into being, when it becomes operative, remember Mr. CCMA, that an Act of Parliament trumps CCMA rules. So then, if you move to the next slide, then came in Jar Coetzee versus Orthow Centurion, handed down 2 or 3 months ago, and in it the Commissioner Stapelberg said the following. Thank you. Very similar approach as the previous one. Rule 25 of the CCMA rules and similar rules of bargaining councils are subordinate to Acts of Parliament. Seeing that they are subordinate to Acts of Parliament, and I've quoted from the award, such rules can no longer serve to restrict legal representatives from appearing at any proceedings, conciliation and arbitration, regardless of the nature of the dispute. Okay. So the empire struck back. CCMA, next slide. And this is what happened. That award was hardly cold. The CCMA handed down a directive to all CCMA practitioners, regional management and commissioners, and basically said the following. I don't care about all of that. You will interpret legal representation according to the following principles, the way that it was before the Act was passed. And obviously the problem is, if you look at that directive from the CCMA, well, first of all, How can you give a directive to a commissioner who has to exercise a discretion whether to allow representation or not? You can't do it, then you restrict that representation. And the second one is, if you give that, then quite simply you take away the right of that commissioner to in fact make such a ruling. But here's the problems. There's section 210 of the Act. Section 210 of the Labour Relations Act basically says, if there's a conflict between the Labour Relations Act and any other act, the Labour Relations Act trumps that act. Okay? Unless it's the Constitution, unless that act specifically amends the Labour Relations Act. Right? So what do we have here? You have the CCMA rules not in the Labour Relations Act. They are in separate rules. In fact, 10, 15 years ago, we took out the rules from the Labour Relations Act and gave that right to the CCMA. Next slide. So therefore, what I've tried to do in my very short presentation is try to make some sense in an ever-changing environment. As I said to you, a practitioner that's up to date is a competent practitioner. A practitioner that's not up to date is an incompetent practitioner. The big challenge that you have as HR practitioners, you operate in that strange environment, unlike most professions, where you're subject to constitutional imperatives. And secondly, you're subject to checks and balances set out in legal fora. It's a very strange environment to operate within. It's a very challenging environment. And you have to be fearless within this environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I feel like I need a zone after all this. I'm totally flabbergasted. I'm now calling Natalie to come and tell us about the zone, which I thought I would have now. Does it intoxicate people?
Is this mic on? Hello, everybody. Sure. Dr. Van Zyl, I'm confused. I'm so glad I'm not a legal practitioner. But I think it was a good presentation. Thank you. Ezra, can I just check? How are we doing this? So I speak first and then I ask. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Natalie Skeppers. I'm going to do the fearless thing and I'm going to try and clear some muddy waters around this topic. For the last year or so, I've been involved in trying to assist organizations in getting their substance abuse policies going. And this topic has been coming up more than once. So I've been busy behind the scenes trying to assist, you know. Next slide. Next slide. Right, next slide. So we're talking about marijuana. I think the people here prefer Zol. I don't know. I'm going to stick to marijuana. That's the word. I just, by the way, searched some of the names, you know, that marijuana is about 10 different names you can give it. Cannabis, dacha, but we'll stick to marijuana for the sake of the presentation. Next. So if you look under your chair, you'll see that we've stuck a little Zol under, so just so that we can do some tests during this. No, I'm kidding. This is not the Oprah Winfrey show. Come on, are you kidding me? And I see this gentleman was like, let's go for it. This is our topic, and sorry to disappoint you. Maybe later. Can we move on? So, back to the Constitution. Yeah? This is not my rules, my laws. I'll tell you later on what I think should happen, should not happen. But on the 18th of September last year, 2018, the constitutional rule that every citizen has a right to privacy and has a right to be informed, and as a constitutional court's ruling was that you could be in possession, or you will be, or you can be in possession of marijuana, okay? Now, I want to give you a little bit of history where some of this may have started. If you remember, I don't know if it was Dr. but Mr. Embryo Otsini from the IFP, when he was going through medical treatment, he introduced this into Parliament. And 1 month later, he passed on, but this was still in the roll, so they had to deal with the issue. Right, so it didn't just arrive, and we weren't just caught off guard. And I think that's the problem that even Dr. Van Zyl is trying to explain here. A lot of us, when the legislation is passed, we say, oh wow, how did that happen? It didn't just happen. It takes a while for Parliament to actually enact legislation. Can we move on? Next slide. So what did the Constitutional Court rule? This is awkward, I don't know where to look. That it is not a criminal offense for an adult citizen to use, possess or grow marijuana in private for personal consumption. Now I'm not going to give you a lecture on how to do that, how to grow it, how to carry it, how to use it. Mine is more on a workplace safety. I'm a health and safety practitioner stroke risk management professional. So my focus to the HR personnel, and if there's safety people, risk people here, that's where my focus is. So make note, adult citizen. When are you an adult in this country? When you turn how old? What age? 18? 16? 21? Are you an adult when you're 18? Are you sure? What about when you're 21? What happens then? Which laws relinquishes you from being 18? I don't think you guys know, so I'm going to leave you there. There's 16, 18, and 21. I thought it was 21. Or is it only because you give people a 21st birthday now you think they're 21? Right, so it has to be an adult. The reason for this, when kids come to work or when they enter the workplace, they may not necessarily be 21. So it speaks to adult citizen. Possess, grow in private. Next slide. So this was a win for both the Dacha party and every other person in the room that is keen to smoke now and again in private. So they were very happy with this ruling. However, move on. Medical marijuana. What is medical marijuana? Have we defined what medical marijuana is? So my question is, does it possess or is it going to contribute to us having a workplace hazard? Now, if you work in safety and if you work in operation where there's moving parts or moving equipment, you know your environment already is tricky. Now, on top of that, does this now pose a problem? Let's move on. The changes in legislation. Now, what happened on the 18th, the judge says, fine, this is going to happen. You have from the 18th of September and 2 years going forward to come up with policies, regulations, and how this is going to be set out. Has anyone seen or heard anything around the space? Now, the other day was the 18th of September. It was 1 year. Meaning we have 1 more year to go until we are told that these are going to be the regulations that will be published either by the Department of Health or the Department of Education or the Department of Transport or for that matter, I think the ruling was more for the courts. So nothing has happened since, hence my presentation. Does not mean, Rodney, you in HR, right? You sit back and do nothing. Sit on your laurels as employer representatives. The legislation has told you there's something coming. Let's move. Move that one. Right, just a bit of interest here. Some of the countries that have made medical marijuana legal, it would include some parts of South Africa, or South Africa for that matter. And the interesting thing is it does not include Lesotho, right? Illegal but decriminalized. That means they can smoke it, medical marijuana, but it's decriminalized. In other words, the police won't come and catch you, take you to court or to jail for that. And then where you see the orangey, the yellow pinkish, it's illegal but often unenforced. Those countries like your South Americas and all that, you know people are smoking. And then in the red section is of interest to me. Do you see that it's almost most of Africa? Most of Africa. And just think, if you have African operations, if you have a company in South Africa and it operates in, let's say, Rwanda or Zimbabwe or Nigeria, whatever, which legislation will then be precedent? Which one will then be apply? Would it be the South African one, where employee works for you in South Africa, he's got a legal contract in South Africa, but he's now asked to go and work somewhere else? I'm not going to answer that. I'm here to make you ask questions, right? Next one. This is awkward, Solly, not to be in charge of my own presentation. So let's start clearing the haze here. Next one. What is the definition of private? Private really means that, no, we've dealt with the slide, just move on. Right, let me deal with the marijuana. The aspects of marijuana includes the cannabinoids and THC, which is found in what we call marijuana. Will it be in the bloodstream? And if it is in the bloodstream, how will you then manage that? Okay, so we know from history and from research that at least it stays within your body for 2 weeks. And then there's an issue around employers can or cannot discharge employees for the presence of marijuana. In other words, it's in your bloodstream, does not mean that you are impaired or intoxicated. The presence of marijuana when you do a test does not mean that. I just want to be clear on that. And then we need to deal with the aspect on drug testing. Now, when we designed substance abuse policies, we were very focused on alcohol testing. So if you go to operations, most operations, when you arrive at the gate, what do they give you? They give you that blower or the alcohol blower, then you blow into it. This is not going to be the case now, right? So the drug testing regimes also include mostly a urine test because it's the easiest part, right? So you got to do further diagnostics. You cannot just rely on that. And will it determine whether you're impaired or whether you're disabled or under the influence, right? So we're not there yet. We've been given 24 months to decide, to come up with regulations that will actually determine that. The reason I also showed you other countries they're mapping is because countries like Canada, it's totally legal, but in other countries in the US, what they're saying is you can carry 5 milligrams. Now, I know some of you may have 5 milligrams. I just don't have my bag here. I wanted to show you how much is 5 milligrams. It's very little. You can't do much with 5 milligrams. I'm kidding. I don't have it with me. But yeah, and do they pose a risk to themselves or to others? What will happen if the person is later on intoxicated or impaired? How will their behavior be reflected? Right, next one. So the scope of private would include your own car, and I specifically say your own car. You may be here on this trip here with the company's vehicle or a hired vehicle, or I don't know if you came here with Uber, and that would not constitute your own vehicle. Your own means your own, right? And your own bag. So IPM bag is now yours, so I would assume that's your bag. It can't be that you're carrying the marijuana in some other form or shape. It has to be on your own, on your person. It's like, think of a firearm, exactly like that. And with your friends in your private space, your backyard. So questions that we as professionals have is that if I'm caught next door at my neighbor's place, and that's not designated as my private home, and I'm sitting there with my colleagues, like how we use, usually when we have drinks next door, would that constitute that you are now doing something illegal? I'm just putting the question out there. Meneer, you look like someone that would normally carry your wife's bag. So let's say you're in the mall, you know those guys, they carry their wife's handbags. Let's say you are caught somewhere, and now you're carrying your wife's handbag and there's something in the bag. How are we going to explain that medical marijuana that's in the bag if it's not your own marijuana? Next slide. So the ruling does not give employees the license to attend at work under the influence of marijuana. That's what we think, and that's what we're saying right now. If your premises and your workplace is constituted as a drug-free workplace. That is what it means. I do know that we're going through the emotions and we're trying to define what does a drug-free workplace mean. because so far it has been only alcohol, because it was easy to detect. By the way, there are other drugs that people take, and you may not be able to detect it unless you check their eyes or their behavior, and nobody stops them. Nobody stops and asks them, are you under the influence of cocaine? It's happening, right? It does happen. So employers need to reconsider their workplace policies. Remember, Dr. Van Zyl said there has to be a rule. We can't just wake up tomorrow and now start randomly testing everybody if there's never been rules in place that says if you get to the workplace, you're going to stand in a line and we're going to start taking urine samples. It cannot work like that. Also, there's got to be an aspect of privacy. Now, can you imagine people being lined up asking to pee in a cup? It's going to infringe on the right to privacy, the right to their space, and it brings it on all sorts of legal aspects in terms of how you're going to manage this. Next slide. Okay, we can move on. So, back to health and safety. Next one. What we are implementing at the moment is the Occupational Health and Safety Act, General Safety Regulations, and then if you work in the mine sector, it would be the Mine Health and Safety Act, where we're very explicit around risk assessments, hazards in the workplace, safety of employees, taking care of other people's safety, making sure that you don't split on somebody else. And you said a very interesting thing, Dr. Van Zyl. I realize now the reason why employees do not want to come forward, because if they do split on their colleagues, there's no protection. And perhaps that is something that when we look at legislation, how do we link that protection to even health and safety legislation? So when is an employee impaired, under the influence, or intoxicated? Next slide. Unlike with alcohol, it was very easy to do the breathalyzer test. Right now, every employer, if you're representing your employer, you cannot derogate your responsibility because there's laws coming or there's current laws. Unless you put in place policies, you still have the responsibility to ensure a safe and healthy workplace for all employees regardless. And in saying that, it means we still will have to test this in the Constitution or in the courts, or with some research that needs to be done in South Africa, with South African cultures, behaviors, and attitudes. Next. So, we understand how other applicable legislation has been affected. For example, the National Road Traffic Act, where it's very specific around having alcohol in your system and define the limits and define the period of what intoxication means. Right now with marijuana, it's not the same. Next. So what this section says is that no person may drive a vehicle or occupy the driver's seat of a motor vehicle of which the engine is running. I'm not sure about the running vehicle, but yeah, it's there. On a public road, while under the influence or intoxicating liquor or drug, having a narcotic effect. If you are now in logistics, or if your business is that your guys must be driving even the CEO around, this is where this legislation is very, very specific. That a narcotic effect, and do we know whether marijuana has a narcotic effect? I'm told yes. Next slide. So how do we do this? What is it that we are required to do? We call it safety management systems. Next. So you must have something that talks to compliance. You must look at the productivity, the flexibility of your programs, and then the litigation aspects, which I'm not going to go into because this will take us on another discussion for another day. Next. So, like with alcohol, the employer has a right to introduce these measures, as I say, safety management system. But what do these measures look like? What does it mean? Do I now have everybody disclose that they are using medical marijuana? And I just want to mention this. There is a sense now that it's free for all. I even see vehicles in the road driving that they're selling this little cans that says medical drinks, marijuana drinks, and the other day I saw an advert for medical marijuana cupcakes. If you're selling that other than, or you're not even supposed to sell it, if If you're using it other than in your private space, it is illegal. You have to contain this issue now. It's like everybody's just doing what they want to because they think it's free for all. Medical marijuana is not the same as recreational marijuana. So, example rules and regulations that prohibit the consumption and address the presence of marijuana at work and reporting to work under the influence. There are certain things that the employer can do currently in terms of ensuring that employees are not under the influence, which we're still doing because there's no clarity. Now, it bears to say that currently we do pre-employment medicals with HR and then we determine, but this person has marijuana in their system, sorry, we can't employ them. But if that person smoked like a week ago, they're not impaired, they're not intoxicated, and I know companies would not employ people on that basis. But what if it was a medical marijuana, let's say it took oil or some form of marijuana that is helping or is part of a coping mechanism? Can we still apply the same pre-employment medical rules? No, I don't think so. I think that now is the time for us to talk about where does that take us in terms of policies, rules, regulations. Next slide. You can pass that. So we have the hierarchy of documents that needs to be complied with. You have your legislation that has come out, and then the policies must come through the courts, and then the procedures, and at worker level, guidelines and local documents. May I also say that it's not going to be the same for all operations. If you're working in an ice cream factory, not that it's not hazardous, you can't compare that to a construction site. You're going to have to split some of the decisions. And what about from site to site? And people differ in terms of their bodies and their weight. So all these factors will have to become part of how you determine your policies. Next. You can skip that. So what I want to say, and I'm almost done, what should a policy have, the minimum? It must define what substance abuse entails, limits and intoxication levels, and that can be done through diagnostics, not just through a random urine sample. How the state of impairment will be determined, I don't know, like when somebody's perhaps under the influence of alcohol, they make them walk in a straight line. I don't know if you can do that with marijuana. I doubt it. There are things that you can look at behavior. If the person came to work this morning and he was fine and now suddenly later on is erratic, for that matter you'll have to determine if that erraticness or he's uncontrollable or something, he's losing memory, is that going to impact the workplace, or is his impairedness affecting his work ability? Privacy must be defined. Like I said, we can't just line people up and say to them, here's a pee cup and let's take your sample. That has to be determined. How are we going to do that? Accommodation strategies is very important. So if a person has a legitimate disability and he needs to have this medical marijuana as part of his coping mechanism, what are you going to do? You can't just dismiss an employee. I believe in some regions, some provinces, if you do that, and maybe in some companies, you may have to dismiss all of them because people are allowed. They actually encourage employees to take marijuana because they work faster, they work better. I've interviewed quite a few people to say, now, what do you do? And it's a false sense of security and a false sense of productivity that we create to keep people under the influence. Disability as well, procedures for testing, we've spoken about that. Chain of custody, this is very important. What happens then with that sample that you've taken? It's part of the substance abuse policy. Are you going to keep it in a cupboard somewhere and then think tomorrow somebody else will come and take it into the lab and do full diagnostics? So your procedures is going to become so much more cumbersome. And employers will have to think about, everything. Would you outsource the service? Would you get a private company in, come there with their truck, their mobile truck, and rather do the testing or send it to them and then they do it? Because you also don't want to know, because some medical things we are not supposed to have access to. Disciplinary action. Yeah, now I'm not going to say anything. I think you had a whole lecture on that. How that's going to work. Up until and including when you want to charge somebody. What would your policy entail? Next slide. So impairment, the definition of impairment is still an evolving topic in relation to medical marijuana. Ultimately, organizations must decide how they're going to implement their own policy in line with the ruling and define impairment and integrate this into information written policies to ensure that it's properly defined. And the enforcement obviously of this must be consistent. You can't separate how you treat management and executives to lower level employees. I've actually worked for a company where I knew that my boss was smoking, and once I tried to implement this, the whole program was halted. He said, no, it's not going to happen. Because you think executives don't smoke? Of course they smoke, right? They're not God. They do these things. Am I right, Saki? You don't know. I must take you to their homes. Next slide. So the rules for workplace drug use and possession. So let's say hypothetically an employee comes to work and he has got his stash on him. Now what do? Do you allow it for him to smoke later lunch break? Or if I'm talking medical marijuana, what is the use and possession rules? Because if the police does a random raid at your premises for some other reason and they come with sniffer dogs and you can't explain this occurrence, then there's another issue. So there's got to be rules, right? Outside of work hours for shift workers. Now the guy's gone home, he has his spliff, and now suddenly you call him back to work. He was outside of work hours, he did what he needed to do, but he's still intoxicated or impaired for at least the first 2-3 hours. What is the responsibility of the employer? That must be defined. Supervisor, human resources, employees, treating physician. A lot of us have occupational health medical doctors on our premises. Safety sensitive employees. Okay, what are those rules? What are the expectations? And would it be aligned to the inherent requirement of the position? We're going to get to a stage where we're going to say in our adverts, please do not apply if you smoke or if you vape or if you do not have sober habits. I've seen some of those adverts. Are we brave enough? Are we fearless enough to tell those employees, please, we run big machinery here, don't even bother, because once we do the test, we're going to detect it and we do random testing. Are we able to do that, and is that a form of discrimination or exclusion? Next slide. Right, reporting policy for issued physician. Now this is where it gets tricky. You may disclose to your medical practitioner or your occupational health nurse, doesn't mean you want your employer to know. Like any other medical condition. Why is this one so special? If I'm on some other medication, I don't disclose it to the employer. Now suddenly, why must I tell my boss that I'm using ARVs or whatever medication? This treating physician will have to make a discretionary call based on the position of the person, based on the work that he's doing, based on the shifts that he's working on, and the risk factors attached to that. So it can't become now a secret in the workplace. Drug testing methods, steps to handle reasonable suspicion, and how do you follow up now when the results come back? What do? You call the person in and say, look, we know you are smoking, you know this, but you need to disclose. And you're back to square one. What if a person is convicted outside of workplace or is arrested? Okay, access to employees, drug abuse programs. Now this is a touchy one. Most EAP programs that I've come across will say, okay, the employee will be assisted, but we want to deduct the money from him because he must show that he wants help. Some programs says, okay, we'll pay, but only once, but not 6 times. Some programs will say we don't pay at all. If the employee needs help, he must help himself. So if you have that situation, how does EAP kick in? And by the way, EAP is not just for the employee, it means it includes his family as well. It means you need to assist them with some form or shape of counseling and support. Next slide. So where to from here? My plea is then to the employer, HR, safety department, and other stakeholders. If you're going to provide a zero tolerance policy in the workplace, you're going to have to consider the environment. If it's in a construction environment, possibly that's what you need to do. Having a policy in place that requires employees to disclose their medical condition status, if this is linked Only if it's linked to the inherent requirement. I mean, if you're an office worker and you're typing the whole day, you need to assess what is the risk and is there a need for concern. Next slide. Systems and procedures in place that address behavioral issues. So the person maybe for the first 3 hours be out of sync or have memory loss or has an attitude. How do you deal with that? Because just because of the first 3 hours of the work day, does that mean now you must dismiss the person? You'll end up with no workers or no employees because it's a behavioral issue that's coming out. So, right, and then performance measures in the workplace to address under the influence. If he can't perform his job while he's taking his medical marijuana, what do? Do you allow the person to go to the sick bay and recover, or do you ask somebody else to stand in or give the person something else, job rotation? That's what we need to deal with. Next. Okay. A common mistake that some employers will make in accommodating medical marijuana is assuming using it will impair the employee's ability to do an essential duties of the job. That is just a quote I got from the Canadian colleagues. I'm almost done. Let's finish. Right, you can skip that. Right, there's some information. Suddenly the business of marijuana is everybody's business. And there's a prediction that women are going to make the most money in this space. I don't know why. I've read some articles from the US. It says this is it, this is our time to make money. So I don't know why they pick marijuana. Next. Right, moving forward. You can skip that. Go forward. Move forward. Right. So one of the last slides, this is not an option to avoid the topic. Seek out professional help. Ask the people in the space to assist you, because I'm predicting that after next year we're going to have a big problem with trying to deal with this issue. I think I'm done. Next slide. Yeah. Can move on. Thank you. I'm going to stop there. I think the material will be available, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Tate Makume. Just get on to it, please, to save time.
Thank you, Program Director, and you gentle folks. Oh, lawyers can make money. You heard what Brian said. I'm still shaking in my boots as I stand here. Mine will be very short. I'm just going to sprint through it. And I know some of you say you can't sprint, can see you. Can I have the next slide, please? Let us not worry about the long list of the shopping list. What I'm going to talk about is simply a story that you won't hear at Zondo's Commission. It's a good story that is happening at one of the state-owned entities called Trendwood. Next slide. We are talking about the work that we are doing. The slide that has passed, that you went very fast through, is the one that indicated that Trendwood was started in 1903. It's about 115 years old. And in all these years, it has never went to government for bailout. And I'm going to try and indicate what happened in that organization for it to be where it is. And maybe summarizing the entire presentation. There are certain things that management did. And when I saw the IPM theme, Fearless Leadership, I thought that this is the story worth hearing. What do we mean when we say leadership is fearless? Our God, and whatever title somebody else calls him or her, never gave us fear. Where did we get it? Now, for me, fearless leadership means the leadership that displays decent human being mannerisms. What we mean by that, we mean if you are in leadership, you must care for the people that you're supposed to lead. And you must create a case for those people to like the organization, for those people to make a contribution to the success of the organization. And the concept that we are talking about there is employee engagement. Can we move the slides? I'll tell you where to stop. But I think just shows the good work that is happening there. You cannot recognize the rent that we have today to the rent that we had about 10 years ago. Let's move. Here we're talking about rainwater mirrors or depicts what's happening in the entire community. 1996, democratization of the workplace, the declining of standards of performance and behavior, my favorite subject, diminutive verb syndrome, management application of duty, employee mental disease, low levels of employee engagement. These are some of the things that are happening throughout industries. We say 1995, the workplace was democratized. And what did Rainwater do? We started what we call the PCP structures. We started what we call democratization of the workplace, where employees influence policy. That was fearless. We have agreed on guidelines like the disciplinary code and procedure, where the unions themselves said, for first time offense, you can dismiss. Now, who are the players in Rainwater? The usual. But our message today is the responsibility, the authority is on leadership, is on management. Next slide. Now, if the employees had a chance, could they have chosen you as their leader? This silence we had at one of our meetings that we dubbed the top 200 meeting. We got a professor from the University of Wits. It was not Saudi, by the way. But, this gentleman asked the question, if the employees had a chance, could they have chosen you? Then we went and we discovered why should anyone be led by you, which gave sort of guidance. Now, Blazing White, as an expert organization on employee engagement, believes that employee engagement is everybody's business. But I stand here and say I disagree. The authority is with the leadership. The authority is with management. And if management can be fearless, then maybe the employees may decide that lead us. Let me tell you a story that happened to me. I had a daughter who died after matric dance, this beautiful thing that girls go to and boys go to every year when they do grade 12. I asked her, if you had a choice, could you have chosen me to be your father? And guess what was the answer? No, Saki, you are too poor. Now, if these people who hardly know you had a choice, could they have chosen you? This is what we did to have most of our managers being regarded as authentic. Can I have the next slide? We say your obligation as a leader, you've got to chaperone. And that word was chosen deliberately. Your employees to exceptional levels of excellence in performance and in behavior. It is the duty of a manager to do that. Now, if the manager is going to seek or run after or be in pursuit of being popular, being fearful, it means that manager is not ready. Let the manager understand right up front that it's your responsibility to help your subordinate to improve. If he fails, and you've got to end in dismissal, in termination of your duties, maybe because of misconduct, or maybe because of incapacity, it is your problem. Next slide. This concept that we are talking about, that we moved away from employee satisfaction. We said we are looking for two things. The employees must make a contribution, and the employees must be happy to work for Rainbow. Next slide. Now we have 5 levels. In these 5 levels, most of the people have only 3. Most people in the area of employee engagement will have 3. Engaged, disengaged, and either engaged or not engaged. The 3 the areas. But now I like this model of black and white, where he says, or they say, there's a group of the employees who are engaged, and there is a group of those who are almost engaged. Now, if you are engaged, there is maximum, there are high levels of satisfaction, happiness to be in the organization, and at the same time, high level of contribution. And that's what we are looking for in an organization. Because if employees are happy to be there, there will be very low levels of turbulence in the organization, and there will be high productivity if they are making a contribution. And there will be those employees who, one of the 2 is either at the medium or high level. And now we have the 3rd group, which are crash and burners, medium or high contribution, and low satisfaction. Now when you look at your stats and you say now, can you identify the employees in the organization who are making a contribution and who are not happy to be in the organization? There will be a lot of reasons. Maybe they see no future for themselves in the organization in terms of the preference of people who will be promoted and recruited in the organization. Women will be happy to be in organizations. You men, including your African men, will feel that, let me just do enough because I've got no hope in hell to get promoted. And there are those who we call the honeymooners and hamsters. Those are the people who have high satisfaction level. They are happy to be working in an organization. They stay for what they get, and they make very little contribution. And we all know them, can identify them. And there are those whose exit will benefit everyone. Those who are disengaged. They are not happy to be there, and at the same time, they are not even making a contribution. I'm sure most of you have seen that WhatsApp message of a young Zulu boy. They ask him, what do you want to become when you grow up? And he says, no my so if you have such people in your organization, their exit will benefit everyone. Next slide. Next slide. Now these are levels, and then all right. Oh, it must be here. Yes. Thanks. Now, Rendota levels of employee engagement. That's how we compare. And we believe that we are continuing to improve. We last had a strike in Rendota in 1996. About 5 years ago, they attempted to go on strike. We interdicted it, and they withdrew their threat. We have such industrial peace in the organization to a point sometimes I go all out and try and provoke them into a strike to no avail. Next slide, please. This is just a schematic representation of the stats. Next slide. Now, when the manager has taken responsibility, he has become fearless in shepherding this employee to those levels of excellence. We have the attrition rate, the turnover at 1.9. We pray that people leave. The only time they leave is when they die or when they go on pension. Our absenteeism rate, we're at 3.2. We're not doing too well because we're hoping to get to about 2.8. The rate of turbulence, the amount of time that managers spend on dealing with grievances and discipline, it is less than 2%. If you have 40 hours, work out 2% in a week, that's the amount of time that they spend on turbulence, on discipline and grievances. Next slide, please. And this is how our performance looks like. I'm still trying to understand why we went to 150%. But all right, it's a story for the other time. But what is depicted here is our organizational performance is quite good. Next slide. We spend a lot of money on leadership, and these are the amounts that we spend on training the leadership of the organization. Next slide. What is a leader supposed to be doing? We said he must care. What do you mean he must care? He must coach. It is his business on a daily basis to make sure that he teaches the people to work well, the people to behave well. We have appointed a lot of women as artisans and soon thereafter as foremen. Most of these people have left the organization because there were problems when it comes to coaching. Those of us who know the environment of artisans, they are the people who like troubleshooting. Even when they know the answers, they'll go to their manager to go and ask, what do I do under these circumstances? And for people who have rapidly been promoted into those positions, it becomes a problem. So it is your duty as a leader, if you want to be fearless, to know more than your subordinates. I like bamboozling. I've got one guy who reports to me who is an advocate, but I intimidate him when he comes to law things. I'm going to intimidate him further here. We say as a manager, as a leader, you need to align the individual development or talent and other needs. Look at the strengths of a person and the type of assignments that you give to that person must be in terms of that person's strengths. And it's your duty to know that as a manager. You must give enough recognition. In most of our employee satisfaction surveys, employee engagement surveys, what came out mostly was, we don't get recognition. Managers only talk to us when it is time for appraisals. We would like managers to give us recognition more often. And you must engage in dialogue. We have a lot of dialogues in Grandwater, like we say. In 1996, when the workplace was democratized, we started having sessions where on a monthly basis, we meet with unions to discuss issues. Sometimes issues for information, and most of the time issues for consultation. And our employees understand what we mean when we say we are consulting. Next slide. As an executive, you need to create a business case for employee engagement, for employees to like to work for your company, and for the employees to like to make a contribution to your success, you've got to create a case for that. What we mean is, you must create a sense of community. You must have authenticity, and you must give enough significance to the contributions that employees are making. And you must create excitement about what people are supposed to be doing. We say a sense of community. Don't have favorites. Don't have people who will give you intelligence about what people are saying behind your back. Authenticity. I told my boss the other day that I'd made a mistake and I felt that I needed debriefing. And I was sitting there, and after 3 sessions, the lady looked at me and said, "Saki, you lack authenticity." I thought I was authentic. What do you mean? You lack authenticity because you know what is right and you continue to do what is wrong. So, fearless leader will know what is expected of him, and he will know that all the time he must be doing the right thing. And he says, give enough meaning to what people do. And we say, make exciting to work for a place like Rainwater. Next slide. And when you have shown care, you have given a case, then the employee will respond by acting. And that acting will show because when they start acting as individuals, they should assess what they stand for. They should know what they are about, what they want to achieve. Individuals have the right and have to take every opportunity to communicate their needs. And they have a lot of outlets wherein they do the same. Individuals need to take action themselves together with their manager so that they can measure progress during the year. Next slide. Closure. We say you need to care, you must coach, align, recognize, and engage. You must create a case, that sense of community, authenticity, significance, excitement. And when you have done this as a manager, the employees will act. Thank you.
Mr. Chairperson, can we steal 5 minutes of your time for questions?
Yes, but I first want to do the poll, which I have ready here for my sister sitting up there, if it's okay if we can quickly do that. Is that fine?
That's
sure.
fine.
If everybody is connected to Slido now, there's going to be a few poll questions that I think might interest you right now that will be coming onto the screen, so we're just switching it over. The first question, why can't I see that? The first question is, it's on the screen, all right. So these are multiple questions. Do you want to fill them quickly and we'll have the polls run at the bottom?
With the wrong slides.
Oh, he's got the wrong slides. All right, let me just get the right ones quickly.
Was there?
Right, so we've already run the poll. So the first one, let's talk about marijuana. Should it be allowed at the work? 28 people have voted, and it's 50-50. The next one is, my company has a substance abuse policy. 64% has said yes, and 36% has said no. Medical marijuana should be allowed at work. I see everybody's got a 50-50 percentage agreement here. The next one, I have or am smoking marijuana. Oh, only 6%. I forgot to vote.
I don't believe it.
Put the mic on. Is the mic on? Is your mic on in the front so you can comment with me? Is your mic on, Madam Speaker? Yes, there we go.
Surprising, but I hope we can say these statistics right. So I'm sure somebody's waiting for our handout later on.
Yes, so there's no problem with smoking marijuana at work. 19% said yes, and 81% said no.
Wow, okay.
One of those ones I forgot to vote. The next one, no one should be dismissed for smoking legally or illegally. That's interesting.
These are HR people here, right?
Yes.
Are you listening, Dr. Van Zyl? You're going to be very busy. Next one.
Next one is our workplaces should be drug-free.
That's a contradiction now.
Yes, it is. I agree. Next question. My disability should not be to be the concern of the employer.
No. Okay.
All right? Medical marijuana policies, rules should be the same as for alcohol.
Another contradiction.
Another contradiction. The room is contradicting itself. Marijuana does not impair.
No. How do they know if 6% don't smoke?
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, that's the poll.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much. I see you.
Just with regards to the questions, I think there's just 2 or 3 I'll grab from my piece here in front.
Can we now do questions? Does anyone with a question here? Colleagues?
I'll do it from here.
Okay.
Did anybody in this room ask questions? Oh, here we go. What material is that speaker? Marijuana? Okay. That's quite a strange question. What does the LRI say with regards to the benefits of the employee sanction, the word dismissed? However, then an appeal has filed and pending. Does payroll withdraw benefits? I think that's a question towards you. Should I repeat that?
Can you just read the question again?
This is Sandile Kubeka. What does the LRA say with regards to the benefits of the employee sanction? The word dismissed, however, then an appeal has filed and pending. Does payroll withdraw benefits? It's a bit of a difficult one.
Okay, so again, you have to make a distinction between a statutory environment of misconduct and a contractual environment of misconduct. In the statutory environment of misconduct, there is no appeal. So we're going to go read Schedule 8. There is no appeal. Right? So that's the one side of it. If you contractually created the right of appeal, then the employee is contractually entitled to that appeal, and then pending the outcome of the appeal, the employee is still contractually an employee of the employer. So that's the short answer to that.
Okay. Final one. Is giving false information on your CV or lying about your qualification a suspendable offence?
Well, let me give you the short answer. So if generally speaking, there is a duty on an applicant to provide honest, truthful information about himself or herself. And if you look at the majority of the employers that allow employees to provide CVs, they indicate on it that you undertake and you provide the necessary security to the employer that what you've said is truthful. The majority of employers today also have a specific clause in applications that says that if you provided false information and you only get caught out maybe 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the line, then dismissal will be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all the questions I got here from the floor. Thank you guys for engaging with your questions.